Hey, and thanks for tuning in to Cheating Tales Lab. We've got another awesome story for you, and we hope you enjoy every moment. So, let's jump into the story and get things rolling. Jack Reeves fumbled with his keys, the exhaustion from his 36-hour shift making even this simple task a challenge. As the lock finally gave way, he stumbled into the quiet of his home. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of the emergency room he'd left behind. He leaned against the closed door, eyes shut, reliving the day's triumphs. Mrs. Johnson's heart transplant had been successful. Little Timmy would walk again after that nasty car accident. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Days like these made the long hours worth it. Opening his eyes, he surveyed the dim entryway. His gaze fell on his daughter's backpack, carelessly tossed on the floor. A fond sigh escaped his lips. "Emily," he muttered, shaking his head, "when will you learn to hang this up?" He bent to pick up the bag, wincing as his back protested the movement. As he lifted it, intending to hang it on its designated hook, a small leather-bound book slipped out and hit the floor with a soft thud. Jack froze, recognizing it instantly. Emily's diary. He stared at it, warring with himself. The Scout law, ingrained in him since childhood, echoed in his mind. Trustworthy. Loyal. "I shouldn't," he whispered to the empty house. Yet even as the words left his mouth, his hand was reaching for the book. Something nagged at him, a feeling he couldn't quite place. Call it doctor's intuition, but something felt off. With trembling fingers, he flipped open the diary. His eyes scanned the pages, not really reading at first, just taking in his daughter's neat handwriting. Then, a phrase caught his attention, making his blood run cold. "And then second dad took me to the science fair. He was so proud when I won first place. I wish dad could have been there, but I know the hospital keeps him busy." Jack read the passage again and again. Each time, the words "second dad" seemed to grow larger, mocking him. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. His mind raced, flipping through possibilities. A grandfather? An uncle? But no, Emily would have used those terms. This was something else. Something deliberate. He turned more pages, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. More references to this mysterious figure leapt out at him. "Second dad helped me with my math homework. Second dad took me for ice cream after my dentist appointment." Jack's hands were shaking now, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. How long had this been going on? How had he not noticed? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped him back to reality. He snapped the diary shut, his decision made. No more secrets. No more lies. It was time for answers. Sarah's key turned in the lock, and Jack straightened, squaring his shoulders. The diary felt heavy in his hand, a damning piece of evidence. The door swung open, and Sarah walked in, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Jack, you're home early," her smile faltered as she took in his expression, her eyes flicking to the diary in his hand. The color drained from her face. "We need to talk," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Sarah's bag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud. "Jack, I can explain." "Can you?" Jack cut her off, his tone eerily calm. He held up the diary. "Who is second dad? Sarah?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. She looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. "What I think," Jack continued, his calm exterior belying the turmoil within, "is that my daughter has been calling another man dad behind my back. What I think is that my wife has been lying to me. Am I wrong, Sarah?" Sarah's shoulders slumped, defeat written in every line of her body. "His name is Alan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dr. Alan Blackwood. He was my professor in college." Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The room spun around him, and he had to lean against the wall to steady himself. "How long?" he managed to ask, dreading the answer. Sarah's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. 10 years. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. A decade. A whole decade of lies and betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say in the face of such a betrayal? Sarah took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. Jack, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. Jack jerked away from her touch as if it burned. Not what I think, he spat, his calm finally cracking. What exactly am I supposed to think, Sarah? That you've been having an innocent tea party with your old professor for the last 10 years? That you just happened to forget to mention it? Sarah flinched at his words. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Happened. Jack's laugh was bitter. Things like this don't just happen, Sarah. You made a choice. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me, every time you let our daughter call him Dad, you made a choice. The sound of the front door opening again cut through the tension. Margaret, Jack's mother, walked in, her arms full of groceries. Her smile froze as she took in the scene before her. Jack? Sarah? What's going on? Margaret asked, her eyes darting between them. Jack turned to his mother, ready to explain, when he caught the flicker of guilt that crossed her face. His eyes narrowed. You knew, he said, his voice filled with disbelief and anger. Margaret set the groceries down, her hands trembling slightly. Jack, please, let me explain. Explain what, Mom? Jack's voice rose, filling the small entryway. Explain that you've been covering for Sarah's affair? That you've been lying to me too? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Jack's laugh was hollow, devoid of any humor. How long have you known? I found out a few years ago, Margaret admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I kept quiet to protect the family. I thought if I ignored it, it might go away. Jack shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. Protect the family? By lying to me? By letting my daughter call another man Dad? Sarah stepped forward, reaching out to Jack again. Please, Jack, let's talk about this. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. Jack jerked away from her touch once more. Mistakes? A decade-long affair isn't a mistake, Sarah. It's a choice. A choice you made every single day for 10 years. He turned to Margaret. And you're supposed to be my mother. How could you keep this from me? Margaret's tears were flowing freely now. I'm so sorry, Jack. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to see our family torn apart. Well, congratulations, Mom, Jack said bitterly. You've succeeded spectacularly. Our family isn't torn apart. It's obliterated. With that, he pushed past them both, heading for the stairs. He needed to be alone, to process this betrayal that seemed to infect every aspect of his life. Jack, wait. Sarah called after him. Where are you going? We need to talk about this. Jack paused on the stairs, not turning back. I'm going to check on our daughter. The one person in this house who hasn't been lying to me for years. His voice was cold, detached. Don't follow me. I can't even look at either of you right now. As he climbed the stairs, he could hear Sarah's muffled sobs and his mother's attempts at consolation. But he felt nothing. The shock was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. He didn't know if he'd ever be able to feel anything for them again. In the days that followed, Jack's world crumbled around him. He threw himself into his work, performing back-to-back surgeries with laser-like focus. The operating room became his sanctuary, the one place where the chaos in his personal life couldn't touch him. His colleagues noticed the change in him. The usual warmth in his eyes was replaced by a steely determination. His easy smile was now a line of concentration, but they attributed it to his legendary dedication, not knowing the turmoil that lay beneath the surface. Dr. Thompson, the head of surgery, stopped him in the hallway after his third consecutive shift. Jack, you've been here for 72 hours straight. Go home, get some rest. Jack's smile didn't reach his eyes as he replied, I'm fine, sir. There's always more work to be done. Dr. Thompson frowned, concern etching lines on his forehead. Jack, I admire your dedication, but you're no good to your patients if you're exhausted. Take a break. That's an order. Jack nodded, knowing he couldn't argue. But the thought of going home filled him with dread. Home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. As he drove home, his mind wandered to the confrontations that awaited him. Sarah had been trying to corner him for days, attempting to explain, to justify her actions. But how could anyone justify a decade of lies? He pulled into the driveway, steeling himself for what was to come. As soon as he stepped through the door, Sarah was there, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Jack, please," she began, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk about this. I know what I did was wrong, but you have to understand. Your work, you were always at the hospital. I felt so alone." Jack's eyes were cold as he looked at her. "So you decided to sleep with your professor? To let him play daddy to our daughter? Tell me, Sarah, how exactly am I supposed to understand that?" Sarah flinched at his words. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Alan was there when you weren't. He listened, he cared, and I didn't." Jack interrupted, his voice rising. "I was saving lives, Sarah. I was working to provide for our family. And all this time, you were, what? Playing happy families with your lover?" Sarah's face crumpled. "It wasn't like that, Jack. I love you. I've always loved you. Alan he was a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake." Jack shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk, Sarah. A mistake is being late for a dinner reservation. What you did, that's not a mistake. That's a choice. A choice you made every day for 10 years. He pushed past her, heading for the stairs. He needed to see Emily, the one person in this house who hadn't betrayed him. He found Emily sitting alone in her room, her eyes red from crying. His heart broke at the sight. In all the chaos, he hadn't stopped to think how this was affecting her. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, sitting next to her on the bed. "How are you holding up?" Emily's lower lip trembled. "Is this my fault, Dad? Because I wrote about him in my diary?" Jack pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "No, absolutely not. None of this is your fault, Emily. You hear me? This is about choices that adults made, not you." Emily clung to him, her small body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to call him Dad," he said. "He said it would make Mom happy." Jack's jaw clenched at her words, but he kept his voice gentle. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Emily. You did nothing wrong. The adults in your life, we're the ones who messed up. But I promise you, we're going to fix this. Somehow." As Emily's sobs subsided, Jack felt a renewed sense of determination. He would get through this, for her sake if nothing else. He might not know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to protect his daughter from the fallout of this betrayal. That evening, as Jack sat in his study, trying to make sense of the chaos his life had become, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. "Hello? Jack? This is Alan Blackwood." Jack's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles turning white. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost condescending. It took every ounce of Jack's self-control not to hang up immediately. "What do you want?" he managed to grit out. "I think it's time we discuss this situation like gentlemen, don't you?" Blackwood's tone was infuriatingly calm, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. Jack's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. "Fine," he spat out. "Name the time and place." As he hung up, Jack's mind was already formulating a plan. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Blackwood might think he had the upper hand, but Jack was just getting started. He would protect his daughter, salvage what was left of his family, and make sure Blackwood paid for his part in this betrayal. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he never thought he'd have to face. But Jack Reeves was no stranger to adversity. He'd fought to save lives in the operating room, against impossible odds. Now, he would fight for his family, for his daughter, for his very sense of self. As he looked out the window at the setting sun, Jack felt a strange calm settle over him. The storm of emotions that had been raging inside him for days quieted, replaced by a steely resolve. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. He was Dr. Jack Reeves, and he didn't back down from a fight. The ambulance sirens pierced the night, their urgent wails growing louder as they approached County General Hospital. Dr. Jack Reeves stood at the emergency room entrance, his face a mask of determination. The call had come in 15 minutes ago, A devastating multi-car pileup on the highway. Multiple critical injuries. All hands on deck. As the first ambulance screeched to a halt, Jack's mind snapped into focus. The chaos of his personal life faded into the background. Here, in this moment, he was Dr. Reeves, trauma surgeon. Nothing else mattered. What have we got? Jack barked as the EMTs rushed the first stretcher towards him. Male, mid-30s, severe head trauma and possible internal bleeding. One of the EMTs rattled off. BP's dropping fast. Jack's hands were already moving, assessing the patient as they wheeled him inside. Get him 2 or 3. Page Dr. Sanderson for neuroconsult. Move. For the next several hours, Jack was a whirlwind of activity. He moved from one critical patient to another, barking orders, performing intricate surgeries, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. In or two, elbow deep in a patient's chest cavity, Jack felt a bead of sweat trickle down his forehead. Suction, he commanded, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. We've got a bleeder here. As he worked to repair the torn aorta, Jack's mind flashed briefly to Sarah, to the betrayal that had shattered his world. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. He couldn't save his marriage, but he could save this life. Hours blended together as Jack moved from one emergency to the next. He was vaguely aware of the nurses murmuring in awe at his stamina, his laser-like focus. Let them talk. This was what he was born to do. As the crisis began to subside, Jack stepped out of the OR, peeling off his bloody gloves. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the ache of exhaustion setting in. But there was no time to rest. More patients needed him. He was heading towards the next, or when he spotted a familiar figure in the hallway. His steps faltered as he recognized Dr. Alan Blackwood, the man who had been playing second dad to his daughter for years. Blackwood was standing with another doctor, engaged in what appeared to be a casual conversation, as if he hadn't torn apart a family, as if he had every right to be here. Their eyes met across the bustling ER. Blackwood's lips curled into a smirk, a look of smug superiority that made Jack's blood boil. Jack's hands clenched at his sides, the urge to wipe that smirk off Blackwood's face with his fist nearly overwhelming. For a moment, Jack saw red. He imagined striding across the room, grabbing Blackwood by his expensive collar, and slamming him against the wall. He could almost feel the satisfying crunch of the man's nose breaking under his fist. But then a nurse's voice cut through his violent fantasy. Dr. Reeves, we need you in or 4. It's critical. Jack blinked, the red haze receding. He took a deep breath, unclenching his fists. With a last, cold look at Blackwood, he turned and strode towards or 4. He had lives to save. Blackwood could wait. As Jack scrubbed in for yet another surgery, he forced himself to focus. Push away the anger, the betrayal, the hurt. Channel it all into saving lives. That's what he did best. That's what he could control. Hours later, as the sun began to peek over the horizon, Jack finally emerged from the OR. The crisis was over. They had lost 2 patients, but saved many more. It was a victory, albeit a bittersweet one. As he headed towards the locker room, dead on his feet, a voice called out to him. Dr. Reeves? A word, please. Jack turned to see Dr. Harrison, the hospital administrator, beckoning him into his office. With a weary nod, Jack followed him in. Remarkable work tonight, Jack, Dr. Harrison began, his tone grave despite the praise. You saved a lot of lives. Just doing my job, Jack replied, too tired for false modesty. About that, Dr. Harrison continued, his expression turning grim. I'm afraid I have some bad news. The board has decided that due to budget cuts, we need to eliminate 1 senior surgeon position. Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. After everything he'd been through, after the hell of the past few days, now this? I see, he said, his voice carefully neutral. And I suppose I'm on the chopping block? Dr. Harrison spread his hands in a helpless gesture. Nothing's been decided yet, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The board will be reviewing all senior staff over the next week. I suggest you prepare to defend your position. Jack nodded, his mind already racing. He'd have to fight to keep his job, all while his personal life was in shambles. But he was Dr. Jack Reeves. He didn't back down from a fight. "Thank you for letting me know," he said, standing up. "If there's nothing else?" As he left Dr. Harrison's office, Jack's exhaustion was tinged with a new determination. He'd been backed into a corner, both personally and professionally. But he wasn't going down without a fight. Not by a long shot. The park was quiet in the early evening, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the carefully manicured lawns. Jack Reeves sat on a bench, his posture rigid, eyes scanning the path. He checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes. Blackwood was late. Typical. As if summoned by Jack's impatience, a figure appeared on the path. Dr. Alan Blackwood strolled towards the bench, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. His walk was unhurried, almost leisurely, as if he were out for an evening constitutional rather than a confrontation. Jack's jaw clenched as Blackwood approached. The man's casual demeanor, his air of smug superiority, made Jack's blood boil. But he forced himself to remain seated, to maintain his outward calm. He wouldn't give Blackwood the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "Jack, my boy," Blackwood said as he reached the bench, his tone infuriatingly patronizing. "So good of you to meet me here. Lovely evening, isn't it?" Jack didn't respond, merely gestured for Blackwood to sit. The older man lowered himself onto the bench, arranging his expensive coat around him with fastidious care. "Now then," Blackwood began, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "I think it's time we discuss this situation like gentlemen. Don't you agree?" Jack remained silent, his eyes fixed on Blackwood's face. Let the bastard talk. Let him dig his own grave. Blackwood, seemingly unperturbed by Jack's silence, continued. "I understand you're upset. It's a natural reaction. But I think, if you look at this objectively, you'll see that there's a way for all of us to benefit from this situation." Jack's eyebrow raised slightly, the only outward sign of his incredulity. Benefit? From his wife's infidelity? From the betrayal of his family? He was curious to see how Blackwood would spin this. "You see," Blackwood went on, warming to his theme, "Sarah and Emily, they need me. I've been a part of their lives for so long now. And you, Jack, well, let's be honest. Your work keeps you away so much. They need a stable presence in their lives." Jack's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with the effort of restraining himself. "But still," he said nothing. "What I'm proposing," Blackwood said, leaning in conspiratorially, "is an arrangement. I continue to see Sarah and Emily. I can be there for them when you can't. Think of it as a support system. For your family." The audacity of the suggestion nearly took Jack's breath away. For a moment, he was speechless with rage. But then, something shifted inside him. A cold, clear anger replaced the hot fury that had been burning in his chest. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was soft, but there was steel beneath the quiet tone. "An arrangement," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's an interesting proposal, Alan. May I call you Alan?" Blackwood nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. He clearly thought Jack was coming around to his way of thinking. "Let me counter with an arrangement of my own," Jack continued, his voice still dangerously soft. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away. From Sarah, from Emily, from my family. You're going to disappear from our lives so completely it'll be like you never existed." Blackwood's smug smile faltered. "Now, Jack, be reasonable." "I'm not finished," Jack cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. "If you don't, I will destroy you. I will report you to the University Ethics Board. I will provide evidence of your inappropriate relationship with a student. Yes, Alan, I have evidence. And I will ensure that your academic career ends in disgrace." The color drained from Blackwood's face as Jack laid out his plan in excruciating detail. The older man's arrogance crumbled, replaced by a look of dawning horror as he realized the precariousness of his position. "You can't," Blackwood began, but Jack cut him off again. "I can, and I will, unless you do exactly as I say." Blackwood's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. But what about Sarah? What about Emily?" Blackwood finally managed to sputter. "They need me." Jack stood up, looming over the seated man. What they need, he said, his voice cold, is for you to disappear. You've done enough damage. It's time for you to go. With that, Jack turned and walked away, leaving Blackwood sputtering threats and pleas behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew he'd won this round. As he strode out of the park, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since discovering Sarah's betrayal, he felt in control. Blackwood had thought he held all the cards, but Jack had just shown him how wrong he was. Now, it was time to turn his attention to the next battle. His job at the hospital was on the line, and he'd be damned if he was going to lose that too. With renewed determination, Jack headed home to prepare for the fight ahead. The conference room was silent as Jack Reeves stepped up to the podium. The review board members sat in a semicircle before him, their faces impassive. Jack could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken pressure of what was at stake. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He'd spent the last week preparing for this moment, poring over hospital records, analyzing efficiency reports, crafting a plan that would not only save his job but revolutionize the ER. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Jack began, his voice steady and confident. I stand before you today not just to defend my position, but to present a vision for the future of our emergency room. As Jack launched into his presentation, he could see the board members' expressions shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. He laid out his comprehensive plan to improve ER efficiency and reduce costs, his words painting a picture of a streamlined, cutting-edge emergency department that would set new standards in patient care. By implementing these changes, Jack continued, clicking through his meticulously prepared slides, we can reduce wait times by 30%, increase patient satisfaction by 25%, and most importantly, save more lives. He saw Dr. Harrison, the hospital administrator, lean forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. The other board members were scribbling notes, nodding along with Jack's points. As Jack neared the end of his presentation, he felt a surge of confidence. He'd given them something to think about, something that went beyond simply justifying his own position. He was offering them a way to transform the entire emergency department. In conclusion, Jack said, his voice ringing with conviction, I believe that by adopting these measures, we can not only weather the current budget crisis but emerge stronger, more efficient, and better equipped to serve our community. Thank you. As Jack finished speaking, a murmur of discussion broke out among the board members. Dr. Harrison opened his mouth, presumably to begin the questioning phase of the review, when suddenly, a shrill alarm cut through the air. Code blue in the ER. A voice announced over the intercom. Code blue in the ER. Without hesitation, Jack turned to the board. I apologize, but I'm needed downstairs. Lives are at stake. Before anyone could object, Jack was out the door, racing towards the emergency room. As he ran, he could hear footsteps behind him. The board members were following. Jack burst into the ER to find chaos. A patient on a gurney was convulsing, surrounded by frantic nurses. What's the situation? Jack barked, already moving towards the patient. Male, 50s, cardiac arrest, a nurse reported. We've been doing CPR for 10 minutes. No response. Jack's mind kicked into high gear, assessing the situation in seconds. Get me the defibrillator, he ordered. Already starting chest compressions. Push one of AP. As he worked, Jack was vaguely aware of the board members watching from the doorway. But his focus was entirely on the patient. Nothing else mattered. Clear. Jack called, applying the defibrillator paddles. The patient's body jerked with the shock, but the heart monitor continued its ominous flat line. Again, Jack commanded, resuming compressions. Come on, don't give up on me now. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Jack's arms ached from the constant compressions, sweat beading on his forehead. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Clear. He called again, delivering another shock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, miraculously, a beep. Then another. The heart monitor sprang to life, showing a weak but steady rhythm. We've got a pulse, Jack announced, his voice hoarse with exertion and relief. Get him to the ICU, Stat. As the nurses wheeled the patient away, Jack finally allowed himself to breathe. He turned to find the entire review board staring at him, their expressions a mix of awe and respect. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, a smile breaking across his usually stern face. "Dr. Reeves," he said, "I think we've seen all we need to see. Your position is safe. In fact, if you're amenable, we'd like to offer you the position of head of emergency surgery." Jack blinked, the words taking a moment to register through his post-adrenaline haze. Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "I'd be honored." As the news spread through the hospital, Jack found himself surrounded by congratulating colleagues. Nurses patted him on the back. Fellow doctors shook his hand. In that moment, Jack felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that he hadn't experienced in a long time. But even as he accepted the congratulations, a part of Jack's mind was already moving forward. He had secured his professional future, yes, but there was still work to be done. His personal life was still in shambles, and he had no intention of letting Blackwood or Sarah off the hook. As he headed to his office to change out of his sweat-soaked scrubs, Jack's mind was already formulating his next move. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and Jack Reeves was just getting started. Jack Reeves sat in his dimly lit study, surrounded by stacks of papers and file folders. The soft glow of his laptop screen illuminated his face, casting shadows that accentuated the lines of exhaustion etched there. He rubbed his eyes, bleary from hours of poring over financial records and emails. It had been 3 weeks since his confrontation with Blackwood in the park. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled days. But Jack was nothing if not methodical. He would build his case brick by brick, leaving no stone unturned. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd come to know by heart. Daniel's Investigations. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "It's Reeves," Jack said, his voice low. "Any updates?" "Yeah, Doc. Got some juicy stuff for you. Your wife and the professor met again yesterday. Got it all on camera this time." Jack's jaw clenched. Even after everything, even after he'd made it clear to Blackwood to stay away, they were still seeing each other. "Send me everything," he said, his tone clipped. As he hung up, Jack's eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. It was from happier times. Him, Sarah, and Emily at the beach, all smiles and sunburned noses. He turned the frame face down with a heavy sigh. Turning back to his laptop, Jack pulled up the financial records he'd been combing through. Credit card statements, bank transfers, even receipts Sarah had carelessly left lying around. It was all there in black and white, years of misused family funds, funneled into supporting her affair with Blackwood. A hotel room here, an expensive dinner there. Gifts that Jack now realized were never for him. It made him sick to his stomach. But it wasn't just about the money. Jack had been reaching out to Blackwood's former students, carefully and discreetly. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Blackwood had a history of inappropriate relationships with students, stretching back years. He'd just been clever enough to keep it quiet. Until now. A knock at the study door startled Jack from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, hastily minimizing the windows on his screen. Emily poked her head in, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Jack's heart clenched. In his laser focus on building his case, had he been neglecting his daughter? "Of course, sweetheart. Come here." Emily shuffled in, curling up in the armchair across from Jack's desk. She looked small, vulnerable. Jack waited patiently for her to speak. Is Mom coming back?" Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack sighed. How could he explain this to a child? "I don't know, Emily. Your mom and I. We have a lot to work through." Emily nodded, picking at a loose thread on her pajama sleeve. And Dr. Blackwood? Is he going to be my dad now?" The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He was around the desk in an instant, kneeling in front of Emily and taking her small hands in his. "Listen to me, Emily. I am your dad. The only dad you need. No one, not Dr. Blackwood, not anyone, is ever going to change that. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jack pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes stinging. As he held his daughter, he felt his resolve harden. He would see this through, not just for himself, but for Emily. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Jack found himself staring at his phone again. He scrolled through his contacts, finger hovering over a name he hadn't called in years. Mike Hawkins, his oldest friend, a detective with the police department. Before he could talk himself out of it, Jack hit the call button. Jack? Mike's voice was surprised but warm. It's been a while, buddy. Everything okay? Jack took a deep breath. Mike, I need your help. And I need a friend. Over the next hour, Jack poured out the whole sordid story. The affair, the betrayal, the evidence he'd been gathering. Mike listened in silence, only occasionally asking for clarification. When Jack finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jesus, Jack, Mike finally said. I had no idea. Why didn't you call me sooner? I don't know, Jack admitted. Pride, maybe. Shame. I needed to handle it on my own. Well, you're not alone anymore, Mike said firmly. Listen, what you're doing, building this case, it's smart, but you need to be careful. This Blackwood guy sounds like a real piece of work, and if he's as connected as you say, he could be dangerous. Jack nodded, even though Mike couldn't see him. I know. That's why I called you. I need advice, Mike. Legal advice, sure, but I also need to know I'm not crazy. That I'm doing the right thing here. You're not crazy, Jack, Mike assured him. And from where I'm sitting, you're handling this about as well as anyone could. But listen, you need to be prepared for how ugly this could get. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Jack's eyes fell on the face-down photo frame. For a moment, he saw Emily's tear-stained face in his mind. His jaw set. I'm sure, he said. I have to see this through. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. All right, Mike said. Then let's do this right. Here's what you need to do. As Mike laid out a plan of action, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. And with Mike's help, he would make sure that Blackwood and Sarah faced the consequences of their actions. The game was far from over, but Jack Reeves was finally ready to make his move. The conference room at the Hilton was uncomfortably quiet. Jack Reeves sat at the head of the long table, his face an impassive mask. To his right sat Mike Hawkins, a thick folder in front of him. Across from them, Sarah fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between Jack and the door. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch as the door opened. Alan Blackwood strode in, his silver hair immaculately styled, a confident smile on his face. That smile faltered as he took in the scene before him. What's going on here? Blackwood demanded, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Mike. Who's this? Please, have a seat. Alan, Jack said, his voice eerily calm. All will be explained shortly. As if on cue, the door opened again. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s entered, followed by a woman about Blackwood's age and a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit. Dean Hartley, Jack said, nodding to the older man. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Thompson. Thank you all for coming. Please, be seated. Blackwood's face had gone pale. Jack, what is the meaning of this? He sputtered. Jack leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. We're here to work things out, Alan. Isn't that what you wanted? To discuss our arrangement? Sarah's head snapped up at that, her eyes wide with panic. Alan, what is he talking about? Jack didn't give Blackwood a chance to respond. Let me explain, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. For the past decade, my wife Sarah has been carrying on an affair with Dr. Blackwood here. An affair that began when Sarah was his student. Dean Hartley's bushy eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Blackwood let out a small gasp. That's preposterous, Blackwood blustered. You have no proof. Oh, but I do. Jack cut him off smoothly. He nodded to Mike, who began laying out photos on the table. Photos of Sarah and Blackwood together, in various compromising positions. Hotel receipts, bank statements, financial records showing how my wife has been funneling our family's money to support this affair, Jack continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, and statements from several of Dr. Blackwood's former students, detailing a pattern of inappropriate relationships stretching back years. The color had drained from Blackwood's face. Sarah was openly weeping now, her head in her hands. This is a setup, Blackwood tried, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Jack asked mildly. He turned to Dean Hartley. Dean, I believe you'll find all the evidence you need here to conduct a full ethics inquiry. Mr. Thompson can advise you on the legal implications. The lawyer nodded, already leafing through the documents with a grim expression. Alan, Mrs. Blackwood spoke up, her voice trembling. Is this true? All of it? Blackwood opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Margaret, I can explain. But Jack wasn't done. Oh, there's more, he said, his eyes glinting. Sarah, would you like to explain to everyone how you've been embezzling funds from your research grant to pay for your little rendezvous? Sarah's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mask of horror. Jack, please, she begged. Don't do this. Do what, Sarah? Jack asked, his calm facade finally cracking. Tell the truth? Isn't that what you should have done years ago? The room descended into chaos. Blackwood and Sarah began shouting accusations at each other, their masks of civility finally shattering. Mrs. Blackwood dissolved into tears. Dean Hartley and Mr. Thompson huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers as they pored over the evidence. Through it all, Jack sat silent, watching the destruction he'd wrought. He felt no joy, no satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Mike leaned over to Jack. You okay, buddy? He asked quietly. Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving the scene before him. I will be, he said. Let's finish this. With that, Jack stood, silencing the room with his presence. I think we're done here, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Dean Hartley, Mr. Thompson, I trust you have what you need. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Sarah, he paused, meeting his wife's tear-filled eyes. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. Without another word, Jack turned and walked out of the room, Mike close behind him. As the door closed, he could hear the chaos erupting again behind him. But for the first time in months, Jack felt a sense of peace. The trap had been sprung. Now, all that was left was to deal with the aftermath. The university auditorium was packed, a low murmur of voices filling the air. At the front, a panel of stern-faced administrators sat behind a long table, and in the center, looking small and defeated, sat Dr. Alan Blackwood. Jack Reeves watched from the back of the room, his face impassive. He debated whether to attend this ethics inquiry at all, but in the end, he felt he needed to see it through. To witness the final act of this sordid drama, the head of the ethics committee, a severe-looking woman with steel-gray hair, called the room to order. Dr. Blackwood, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. You stand accused of multiple ethical violations, including inappropriate relationships with students and misuse of university resources. How do you plead? Blackwood, his once proud shoulders now slumped, barely raised his head. I cannot deny the charges, he said, his voice barely audible. A collective gasp went through the room. Jack felt a grim satisfaction. Blackwood had finally run out of lies. What followed was a thorough and damning presentation of evidence. Emails, witness statements, financial records. With each new revelation, Blackwood seemed to shrink further into himself. When it was over, the verdict was swift and unequivocal. Blackwood's tenure was revoked. His academic career lay in tatters. As security escorted him from the room, his eyes met Jack's for a brief moment. There was no anger there, no defiance, just a haunted, empty look that almost made Jack pity him. Almost. As Jack left the auditorium, his phone buzzed. A text from Mike. It's done. Sarah's out. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Sarah's own ethics inquiry at her research institute had concluded. Like Blackwood, she'd been found guilty of ethical violations and financial misconduct. Her career as a researcher was over. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and court appearances. Jack's lawyer, armed with the mountain of evidence he'd gathered, presented an ironclad case for divorce. Sarah, her fight gone, barely contested it. The final hearing was mercifully brief. As the judge delivered her ruling, Jack felt a weight he'd been carrying for months finally lift from his shoulders. In light of the evidence presented, the judge said, her tone grave, this court grants the petition for divorce. Furthermore, given the extent of Mrs. Reeves' infidelity and financial misconduct, the court awards full custody of the minor child, Emily Reeves, to Dr. Jack Reeves. Sarah let out a choked sob from across the courtroom, but Jack didn't look at her. His thoughts were only of Emily, of the future they would build together. As he left the courthouse, Jack was surprised to find a small crowd of reporters waiting. Word of the scandal had spread, it seemed. "Dr. Reeves," one called out, "how do you feel about the verdict?" Jack paused, considering his words carefully. "I'm grateful that justice has been served," he said finally. "But more than that, I'm looking forward to moving on with my life and focusing on what really matters, my daughter." Another reporter pushed forward. "There are rumors that the hospital wants you to join their ethics committee. Any comment?" Jack blinked, taken aback. This was the first he'd heard of it. But as he thought about it, a slow smile spread across his face. "If that's true," he said, "I'd be honored. After everything that's happened, I think ensuring ethical behavior in our institutions is more important than ever." As the reporters clamored for more, Jack politely excused himself. He had somewhere more important to be. An hour later, Jack stood in the driveway of a modest suburban home, Emily's small hand clasped in his. A sold sign swung gently in the breeze. "Well, what do you think?" Jack asked, looking down at his daughter. "Is this going to be a good new home for us?" Emily looked up at him, a tentative smile on her face. "It's nice," she said, "but it's going to be different, isn't it? Without Mom?" Jack knelt down, bringing himself to Emily's eye level. "It is going to be different," he admitted. "But different doesn't have to mean bad. We're going to make this our home, you and me. And I promise you, Emily, I'm going to be here for you. Always." Emily's smile grew a little stronger. "I know, Dad," she said. Then, unexpectedly, she threw her arms around Jack's neck in a fierce hug. "You're the only dad I need," she whispered. Jack hugged her back just as tightly, feeling the sting of tears in his eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope, of healing. As they broke apart, Jack stood and ruffled Emily's hair. "Come on," he said, fishing the new house keys out of his pocket. "Let's go check out your new room." Hand in hand, father and daughter walked up the path to their new home. Behind them, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. It was, Jack thought, a fitting end to this chapter of their lives. And as he opened the door to their new home, Jack Reeves felt ready, at last, to begin writing the next one.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I've been getting closer to my stepson lately, something I never imagined would happen. I became a divorcee just a year into my marriage. It turned out my ex-husband had been seeing someone else all along, and I was the only one in the dark. He had been with his girlfriend for a long time, but his family opposed their relationship. Unaware of all this, I happily went ahead with the marriage. I never snooped on his phone when we were dating. It just seemed natural for a man and woman of marriageable age to meet and start a family. However, problems started surfacing during our honeymoon. My husband kept stepping out, and when he returned after a while, his expression was bitter. I would have understood if he just went out for a smoke, but his demeanor was unusually gloomy for a newlywed, and he wasn't affectionate towards me at all. It turned out he had another woman, and he was in contact with her not only on our wedding day, but also the days following. I confronted him quietly, asking if this was how he intended to live, questioning if anyone could see him as a man who had just started a new family. He was indifferent. "Yeah, I don't think I can forget her." He agreed to a divorce without any fuss, and without any regrets, I packed my bags and left. Since then, I had trouble trusting men. Although it's gotten better, there was a tendency to look down on divorcees. So, I never mentioned that I was a divorcee or that I lived alone unless asked. I didn't open up about my situation unless someone inquired. But there was something different about the man I was introduced to later. At least, he didn't seem like he would cause trouble over another woman. I met him in my early 40s. He was raising a college-aged son. His son was also gentle and handsome. When I got divorced, I was in my late 20s, a time when many of my college friends were getting married and starting families. Looking back, I experienced both marriage and divorce during what many consider the prime years of one's life. It wasn't until over a decade later, in my early 40s, that I met my current husband. He was a divorced man raising his son alone. His voice alone conveyed his kindness, and he had a friendly and welcoming demeanor. However, I soon discovered that, much like my first husband, he had a weakness for the attention of other women. This repeated issue caused me considerable stress, leading me to regret my decision to remarry. Despite my disappointment in my second husband's inability to resist other women, I found solace in my stepson, who respectfully called me Mom and did not follow in his father's footsteps. He was a bright college student, cheerful and insightful, which made me proud of how well he was raised, seemingly in spite of his father's example. Initially, our relationship was somewhat awkward, since I became his stepmother when he was a freshman in college. However, he grew on me as he shared memories while looking through photo albums, watched TV with me, and prepared late-night snacks when his father came home late. His attentive behavior made me feel wanted in the household, and over time, my fondness for him evolved, confusingly seeing him as more than just a stepson. Despite these feelings, I reminded myself of the impossibility of them. As a successful freelancer, I was financially independent and didn't need to rely on a man, but I couldn't bear the thought of hurting my stepson, who had come to see me as a mother figure. My son once mentioned while looking through an album, "Mom left us for some reason when I was deep in my teenage years." He still doesn't understand why his mom decided to divorce. It was clear he craved a stable family environment, and I could see his lips quiver slightly when he spoke about his mom. Knowing how much he longed for her presence, I thought it was right to divorce my current husband, but I decided to hang in there a bit longer. From the day I visited, my son held my hand and said, "Mom, let's get along well," which was both touching and heart-wrenching. Despite being an adult, he still harbored insecurities, and I resolved to make our relationship work. My husband's constant late nights caused a lot of stress, and I grew tired of bringing up his issues and arguing. His blatant late returns became more frequent, to the point where I no longer saw him as a partner. When my son applied for a student exchange program and began studying languages, I felt I had no reason to stay in this house without him. Yet the thought of him leaving was deeply saddening. I couldn't get angry at my husband's insincere late returns anymore, but I couldn't bear to hurt my son, who chatted away beside me as I prepared meals. I decided to foster a closer relationship with my son, and oddly enough, alcohol played its part well. As my son got busy with language school, I made special snacks to encourage him. "Son, let's have a beer." "I've got wedge fries today," I said, and he came running in light clothes, massaging my shoulders. We spent the night together until late, while my husband was away on a supposed on-night, 2-day workshop. which I hardly cared whether was true or not. Being remarried and lying alone in a large bed felt lonely. But spending time with my son felt truly wonderful. He said in a shy voice, "Mom, this is a first for me, too," which I replied, "Mom doesn't know much about men either, just got older," as I stroked his back. Since that day, I've been unable to let go of my son's reaching hand. Thinking about him leaving for a foreign country next month brings tears to my eyes unreasonably. He might study there and even meet a woman to marry. Lately, I've been speaking to him in formal language. At first, he was surprised, but soon he listened attentively with a proud face. To be parting ways with such a thoughtful and deep son. I have no words if you find it suffocating, because he was the first man who truly reached out to me. Saying goodbye seems incredibly hard. My son, who filled my life of betrayal with smiles, is indeed my true husband.
One evening, I sat at our table going through my daughter Katie's medical forms. Katie was preparing to start kindergarten, so she had a thorough checkup from the pediatrician. Meanwhile, my wife left her school forms spread out on the table. Glancing lazily at them, I noticed a letter that marked the end of my marriage. In the blood type column, it read A. I froze for about 10 seconds, utterly clueless. I then went to the cabinet and fetched 2 sheets of paper from our medical records. Everything matched my recollection perfectly. Last summer, both my wife and I donated blood to the Red Cross, receiving receipts indicating our blood type. Here they were on 2 sheets of paper. Mine was B, hers was O. So Katie couldn't possibly be my daughter. If my wife was her mother and I witnessed Marie giving birth, then someone with blood type A had to be the father. The kids were already asleep, and Marie was upstairs watching TV. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat in the backyard contemplating the state of my marriage. I'd say it was okay, pretty average, with its fair share of ups and downs. When we were dating and in the early stages of marriage, Marie and I were deeply in love. We were carnal all the time, sometimes passionately, even outside of the bedroom. We were always touching, holding hands, walking side by side, caressing each other as we passed by. Naturally, over time, that faded. Isn't that how it goes in most marriages? But now, faced with undeniable proof of her infidelity, everything I thought about our marriage was shaken. I pondered, what changed? Was it gradual or sudden? It felt like both. The decline in our closeness was gradual initially. However, about 6 years ago, a few months before Katie was conceived, things took a strange turn. Marie, typically warm and loving, started acting oddly. One evening, she came home from work very late, allowed me a brief tender kiss, then hurried to the shower and avoided me for the rest of the night. The next morning was just as chilly and distant. But that night, she was a different person entirely. She came home early, cooked a special dinner, tucked me into bed early, and made love to me with a fervor and passion I thought we'd lost. We cuddled happily before sleep, and Marie expressed her love for me. Several times that week, we shared passionate moments. Then, the coldness returned abruptly. She arrived late from work, didn't utter a word to me, and swiftly disappeared into the shower. For the next 2 months, I hardly recognized the woman I married. Marie was affectionate and distant, attentive and preoccupied, patient and irritable. I asked her numerous times if something was wrong, if there were issues between us or at work. Her only response was to express uncertainty to Bill, admitting that she might just be feeling a bit nervous and apologizing for it. When things eventually settled after about 3 months, it was far from the joyful beginning of our marriage. Marie became less moody, but she was rarely affectionate anymore, and her interest in closeness vanished. We made love no more than once a week, sometimes even less frequently, and only when I insisted firmly. Any gentle suggestion, like maybe we could be carnal tonight, was met with sharp rejection. I had to seriously address the long lapse since our last carnal moment. Marie would reluctantly engage in lovemaking afterward, making it evident she was merely obliging me. Is this dismal pattern common in all marriages? It was the only marriage I carnally knew, so I couldn't say. Naturally, I pondered what was happening, contemplating the possibility of infidelity. However, soon after, Marie became pregnant, and our shared excitement over our future baby and the joy of having our wonderful Katie overshadowed most of my concerns about our relationship. After Katie's birth, we were constantly exhausted, making Marie's disinterest in lovemaking more understandable, though still unsatisfactory to me. Then, when Katie turned 3, Marie became pregnant again, and we welcomed Brian just after Katie's 4th birthday. So Bill and Marie, once passionate lovers and spouses, transitioned into Bill and Marie, parents of 2 delightful yet exhausting children. We both cherished our kids deeply. Despite my current realization of my profound unhappiness with our marriage and our nearly non-existent lovemaking life, I was oblivious to it at the time. If that was the case, then I concluded that all couples with young children experience this phase. With the startling revelation that my daughter wasn't biologically mine, the events of 6 years ago no longer seemed mysterious. Marie must have initiated an affair around that time. This explained her distant behavior and sudden rush to the shower. The subsequent passionate lovemaking and warmth could be attributed to guilt, or perhaps, if I were being generous, to her attempt to maintain the facade of a happy marriage while continuing the affair. As I sat in the yard, observing the night descend and the stars twinkle, my initial shock gave way to growing anger. Not only had my beloved wife betrayed me, but she had also deceived me into raising someone else's child, and perhaps more than one. If I were solely focused on punishing Marie at that moment, I would have stormed into the house, presented her with the evidence of blood types, coerced a confession, and cast her out onto the street. But it wasn't that simple. I cherished my children, regardless of their biological origins. If we were to divorce, Marie would likely gain sole custody once the truth about their parentage surfaced. I contemplated and asked myself, what do I truly desire? The answers became surprisingly clear. Firstly, I needed to uncover the truth about Marie's actions. Was it a fleeting affair? Was she unaware that Katie wasn't my biological child? Or did she know everything and carry on a clandestine relationship for years? Secondly, I was determined to raise my children as my own and shield them from the knowledge of my non-biological relationship to them. Once I delineated my objectives, devising a plan to achieve them seemed remarkably straightforward. I returned to the house and discreetly collected cotton swabs from each of the children's cheeks while they slept, labeling Katie's with a 2 and Brian's with a 3. Then I headed to the kitchen, swabbed my own cheek, and marked it with a 1. I had a friend who worked in a university chemistry lab, and I arranged for him to conduct DNA tests for me. This marked the initial step, the commencement of gathering crucial information. After receiving my initial response, I knew what to do next. A week later, my friend called me without knowing where the samples came from. I told him about meeting people with the same surname, leading to discussions about potential distant kinship. He then mentioned that Bill's 2 and 3 were siblings, but the first one wasn't related. This revelation indicated that they weren't cousins as previously assumed. I thanked him for the information and ended the call. Katie and Brian were siblings, sharing the same parents. Marie, on the other hand, had 2 children with an unknown partner. Did she have knowledge of this? She must have been aware of her relations with this individual, but was she cognizant of his paternity over our children? There was a straightforward means to ascertain the truth. Approaching Marie as she washed dishes in the kitchen, I brought up the topic without turning towards her. I began by telling her I had a question, and she encouraged me to continue. I explained the situation regarding my colleague's biologist friend needing DNA samples from relatives. I suggested that we obtain swabs from her, me, and each child, planning to handle the kids before bedtime and take care of ours later. I checked Marie's reaction closely as I spoke. In the middle of my explanation, she tensed, almost dropping a pan before composing herself. After I finished, there was a minute of silence before she turned to face me. Marie expressed her doubts about the idea, questioning how we could be certain about what the biologist would do with the samples, or if our privacy would be respected. Despite my attempts to argue, she firmly opposed the idea, insisting that she wasn't interested. She asked me to inform my colleague that we declined to participate. I replied softly, saying it was okay either way. Her reaction conveyed to me what I needed to know. My next step involved uncovering the truth about her affairs. Who, where, when, and perhaps why. Although uncertain, searching her home might yield clues. I required time for a thorough search. On Saturday, we planned to visit her parents. Minutes before departure, I pretended a work crisis, feigned a call, then explained the situation to Marie. She reluctantly agreed, departing with the children. Now, I had hours to comb through the house systematically. I deemed my usual haunts unnecessary to search, focusing instead on Marie's spaces. Skipping the kitchen, bookshelves, and living room, I ignored my own areas but meticulously combed through her closet and dresser. The discovery of hidden lingerie hinted at secrets. Only the children's rooms and the attic remained to explore. Concluding that the children's rooms were less promising, I ventured into the attic. Inside, I found assorted old furniture, a few lamps, and numerous boxes of items predating our marriage. Realizing the enormity of the task, I scrutinized the area. Notably, one of the 3 nearby boxes appeared less dusty and had been recently disturbed. Upon closer inspection, I focused on these 3 boxes and uncovered Marie's old belongings, mostly letters from her college days. Among them were letters and keepsakes from myself, including sweet greeting cards. Buried at the bottom of one box, concealed beneath old papers, lay a thin stack of recent notes and 2 unmarked videotapes. Extracting them, I discovered the tapes contained explicit content, while the notes were from Harry, her office superior, expressing overtly closeness sentiments. After scrutinizing the materials for 20 minutes, it became evident that Marie had betrayed me with Harry, beginning around 3 months before our daughter Katie was conceived, coinciding with Marie's peculiar behavior at home. The notes revealed a dynamic characterized by Harry's dominance and Marie's compliance, devoid of affection. They dictated her attire for various occasions and detailed their carnal encounters during late work hours. Some even ridiculed me for unknowingly raising their children. It was apparent Harry had no intention of acknowledging their paternity. My anger intensified as I realized the extent of Marie's deception, knowing Harry was happily married to Caroline, unaware of his affair. Although Marie seemed to willingly participate, there was no indication of coercion. She appeared to relish her submissive role. They both appeared to know the paternity of Marie's children and seemed to enjoy their secret over me. These revelations confirmed Marie's deceit over the past 6 years, deliberately conceiving children from another man while masquerading as my devoted wife. Filled with rage, I resolved to seek revenge on both Marie and Harry. After a brief moment of contemplation, I brought the tapes to the VCR and watched footage of Harry and Marie engaging in carnal acts. The setting of the earlier recording, likely Harry's house, and the more recent one in our bedroom, raised suspicions about Marie's opportunities during my business trips. Overall, the recordings affirmed Harry's closeness dominance over Marie and her eager compliance. The room's lighting wasn't particularly bright, but both figures were clearly visible, and the sound quality was surprisingly clear, allowing me to catch every word and moan on the initial tape. From the outset of their affair, I heard Harry assuming control. Seated on the bed, he directed Marie to perform a provocative strip-tease, which she did with a smile. The closeness was rough, lacking tenderness or affection, and Harry spoke harshly to her. It saddened me to observe that Marie evidently enjoyed the encounter. The second tape featured similar carnal scenes, but included some fresh, intriguing dialogue as they reclined on the bed. Marie queried Harry about his indifference to me raising his children, to which he responded that I was a decent guy who loved children, and he didn't worry beyond that. He mentioned that if it weren't for that, he would advise her to leave me. Marie retorted by questioning what I was good for besides changing diapers. She expressed to Harry that it wasn't fair. Marie defended me, highlighting my kindness and love, comparing them to Harry's treatment. She hinted at being drawn to Harry's roughness because it contrasted with my gentleness. Despite this, they proceeded with their encounter before Harry's departure. Upon completing both viewings, I pondered their arrogance, not only in creating such evidence, but also in foolishly leaving it along with Harry's notes where I could find them. My retaliation would be comprehensive, targeting both of them. I utilized a scanner to digitize each note onto my hard drive. Then, using software borrowed from work for a previous project, I converted each videotape into a digital file on my hard drive for future editing. Once finished, I stashed the records and tapes in the trunk of my car, concealing them under the spare tire. I then meticulously tidied up the attic, ensuring Marie remained oblivious to my presence. Over the following 2 weeks, I methodically executed my plans. It was much easier than I anticipated to feign normalcy with Marie, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred. It struck me that she had deceived me for 6 years, making it easier for me to reciprocate. Despite lacking any desire for her, I continued to act affectionately, even initiating closeness, albeit cautiously, to make it easier for her to refuse. I truly had no desire to touch her ever again. An important event loomed in Marie's life. She had been elected as the new president of the Key Society, a significant charity in our city, and was set to officially assume office at a luncheon where she would deliver a speech outlining the charity's plans for the upcoming year. Marie had served on the Key Society board for 3 years and felt greatly honored to be named president. Nervous about her presentation, she asked for my assistance in preparing the PowerPoint portion she intended to use. This presented me with a golden opportunity. For about a week, I collaborated with her every evening, allowing her to share her slides and other materials with me, organizing them into a cohesive presentation. She rehearsed this several times in the month leading up to her big day, and it always went smoothly. Concurrently, I prepared my own entirely different PowerPoint presentation, ready to replace hers. The night before the luncheon, I deleted Marie's file and substituted it with mine, adding a lock to prevent her from disabling it once the presentation began. All I needed to ensure was that Mary had extended an invitation to Harry and his wife for dinner. I casually inquired, and she confirmed they would attend on that significant evening. I shared Marie's excitement, though for different reasons. Arriving early, Marie, elegantly clad in a black evening gown, looked stunning. I assisted her in setting up the laptop, conducting a couple of tests to ensure smooth playback. We all relished a fine dinner and some initial speeches. Marie was then warmly introduced by the outgoing president, and she approached the podium with a blend of timidity and pride. As applause erupted, she commenced her speech and launched the PowerPoint presentation. Initially, it unfolded as expected, showcasing images of the Society's key charitable endeavors and financial breakdowns. Then, as per my scheme, it abruptly shifted focus. A sequence of still photos followed, frames I extracted from 2 videos depicting a couple engaged in various carnal acts. While some images were dim, the collective impression of a dozen or so unmistakably featured Marie and Harry. For a few minutes, Marie continued addressing key social issues. Then, amid a sudden stir among the audience, she turned to the screen behind her. Gasping, she inadvertently knocked over a glass of water onto the podium, momentarily frozen in shock. Soon, a vivid blush spread across her face and neck as she frantically tried to halt the presentation. By then, still photos had transitioned into brief video clips. Harry's voice rang out as he questioned how they would prevent me from discovering that she was carrying his child. He mentioned that, as long as she allowed me occasional closeness, I wouldn't suspect anything. He added that she should remember that she belonged to him. The room erupted in laughter and jeers from all corners. Marie stood transfixed, utterly dumbfounded, and too stunned to even feel embarrassed. At a nearby table, Caroline, Harry's wife, seized a vase of flowers, smashed it over Harry's head, and exited amidst the commotion. As people gradually vacated the ballroom, they cast glances back at Marie, gesturing and reliving the astonishing spectacle. Surprisingly swiftly, Marie and I were left alone. She stood on the podium, defeated and desolate. Sitting at a table 10 feet away, I grinned broadly as I looked up at her. Eventually, she met my eyes, wearing an expression of profound sorrow. She questioned how I could betray her and stated that she thought I loved her, which struck me as amusing given the circumstances. I burst into laughter and made my exit, denying any remaining love for her. It wasn't like that at all. It was a delightful fantasy, but entirely implausible. I realized that the entire town would soon learn of Harry's paternity, which could jeopardize my custody of the children in the divorce. Additionally, they would resent being labeled as Marie's illegitimate offspring. I acknowledged that I should have been more subtle in my approach. Taking the initiative, I consulted a divorce attorney and collaborated with them multiple times to draft documents for future use. I then created the exact PowerPoint presentation I had described earlier, but instead of waiting for Marie's dinner event, I presented it to her. One evening, 4 weeks prior to the dinner, after putting the children to bed, I summoned Marie and asked her to review the draft of the PowerPoint I had prepared for her upcoming speech the next month. She snapped, questioning if it could wait because she was exhausted that day. Firmly, I asserted that it couldn't wait, reminding her that I needed to review what changes were necessary so I could make them in time. I mentioned that I did all of this for her in my spare time. I then ushered her into the office and seated her in front of the computer. Instructing her to hit the letter A when she was ready, I told her that the file would start on its own, inwardly smiling. I observed her closely. Initially, everything proceeded smoothly as she rehearsed her remarks on the first few slides of the society's presentation. Then she gasped, her face draining of color as she beheld still images of her and Harry engaged in closeness. Turning to me, mouth agape, she remained silent. I met her gaze impassively. Soon video clips surfaced, featuring conversations about his paternity of her children and her deception of me. As more scenes unfolded, Marie frantically attempted to halt the file, but I thwarted her efforts. Eventually, the screen went dark. This ordeal lasted about 2 minutes. Marie slumped in her chair, head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. After a moment, she finally spoke, lifting her head to look at me. In that instant, she seemed to age 20 years. "Bill, me? Oh, Bill, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm truly sorry. Can you ever forgive me?" "Forgive you?" I retorted coldly. "For what?" "Let's see. For having an affair with Harry Dorner, which apparently spanned our entire 6-year marriage. For bearing him 2 children while leading me to believe they were mine. For mocking me and disrespecting me behind my back. For denying me closeness at Harry's behest. Is that what you want forgiveness for?" Her sobs intensified. "Bill, I don't love him. You're the one I love. The one I've always loved." My anger simmered, restrained. I said nothing, but internally I thought, "No, Marie, that's nonsense. You love our lifestyle. You appreciate how I cater to your needs, care for the children, but you don't love me. No woman who loves her husband would behave so deceitfully." I reclined, allowing her tears to flow. I relished her distress, maintaining silence during the 20 minutes it took for her to cry. Eventually, she sniffled several times, wiped her face, and looked at me. "What will you do, Bill? Are you going to divorce me?" "No, Marie, I won't," I lied. "I care too much about Katie and Brian, even if they aren't biologically mine." I let the words linger before continuing. "But things will change drastically from now on. You can count on that. Let's begin immediately. Call that idiot Harry and tell him to be here in 15 minutes. She stared at me, horror evident on her face. "But I can't do that. He's at home with his wife and kids. He won't come." I grinned. "Say whatever you must, but get him here. Let him know if he doesn't show up within 15 minutes. His marriage will be over by tomorrow." She hesitated, perhaps unsettled by the coldness in my demeanor. Without uttering another word, she headed to the kitchen and dialed her lover. When Harry arrived, he wore the insincere smile I anticipated. Marie must have briefed him on the situation, for he appeared anxious and apprehensive. "Come into the office and take a seat, Harry. And you too, Marie. We have something to discuss," I directed. As we settled, I wasted no time. "Okay, Harry, here's the deal. You've been enjoying yourself with Marie for quite some time, making me out to be a fool. That ends now. Everything has changed, and it's time for you to face the consequences." He began to respond, but I silenced him. "Sit, watch, and listen." I scrolled through the PowerPoint presentation and relished his horrified reaction to its contents. When the presentation ended, a prolonged, unexpected silence ensued. Strangely, I found myself enjoying it more than they did. "Now you'll do exactly as I say without question, or your seemingly blissful marriage to Caroline will abruptly and publicly come to an end. Understand? Don't speak. Just nod," I instructed. He begrudgingly nodded, his expression seething with anger. "Good. Listen carefully and keep quiet. I have several documents for you to sign. I'll give them to you one by one. You may want your lawyer to review them, so I'm giving you 48 hours to return them signed. Otherwise, Caroline will be invited to view a brief video clip. The first document acknowledges that you are the biological father of Katie and Brian and commits you to pay child support until they turn 21, along with a lump sum for their college education. The amounts are specified here, $10,000 per child per year, plus $100,000 per child upon their first year of college. The funds will be placed in a trust fund, of which I am the sole trustee, with authority to utilize it for the children's needs, I explained. Harry erupted from his chair in fury. Listen, Bill, this is utterly ridiculous. I have no intention. I forcefully pushed him back into his seat. Shut the hell up, Harry. You're wealthy and we both know it. This isn't your show anymore. It's mine and you have no choice. Now keep quiet until I give you permission to speak, I commanded. Across the room, I noticed Marie looking at me with a horrified expression. This was a side of her devoted husband she had never witnessed before. The second document grants me permission to adopt the children. You and Marie will need to sign it. The third document entails your permanent renouncement of parental rights to Katie and Brian, pledging never to disclose your paternity to anyone. And lastly, a personal admission that you exploited my wife in the workplace, coercing her into an affair, I continued. What? Harry exploded once more. That's a complete fabrication. She wanted it as much as I did. Sit down, Harry, I commanded sternly. Perhaps, but Marie will still file exploitation complaint against you. It's one of my conditions for not divorcing her. Do you understand, Marie? I asked, turning to her. She glanced fearfully between me and Harry, offering no response. Allow me to clarify, I said to both of them. I have no immediate plans to act on these documents. Consider them my insurance, Harry, in case you ever contemplate shirking your financial obligations to our children or suddenly decide to reveal their true parentage to others, I added, handing Marie the prepared exploitation complaint. Sign it, Marie, I instructed firmly. She complied silently, still appearing apprehensive. Now, Harry, we're nearly finished with your part in today's proceedings. I expect these documents back in my possession within 48 hours. You can deliver them here, and should you entertain any misguided thoughts, such as damaging me, rest assured, copies of your incriminating correspondence with Marie are securely stored, ready to surface if necessary, I concluded, gazing at him disdainfully. Any questions? Taking Marie's hand, I guided her back to the office and seated her. I had never witnessed her in such a state before. She trembled with horror. It's all right, Marie. I would never damage you. There's no need to be afraid, I assured her. God, Bill, what's gotten into you? How could you do this to Harry? She exclaimed. I regarded her with some surprise. You truly don't understand, Marie. Don't you realize that what he did to you, to us, is malicious and unjust? She blushed. Yes, of course. It's plain. Well, you're so furious. It's as if you've lost your mind, she continued. I remained silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. Marie, I've assured you I won't divorce you. However, our marriage will undoubtedly change drastically. Do you comprehend? I queried. Yes, Bill. I'll do whatever it takes to make amends. But what have I done to you? She pleaded. All right, I acquiesced. Let's establish a couple of conditions. Within 2 weeks, you'll secure a new job. I won't permit you to continue seeing Harry daily at work. It should be evident, but you are to have no further personal interaction with Harry. No touching, kissing, lovemaking, phone calls, emails, nothing, I outlined. Furthermore, if our marriage endures, it will be on a wholly different foundation. I refuse to tolerate your bad temper, coldness, and indifference. I expect you to be a cheerful, kind, and affectionate wife each day. Through your actions, demonstrate your love and appreciation for marrying me, forsaking the wild, uninhibited desirability you shared exclusively with Harry. I anticipate seeing you in the seductive lingerie you've kept hidden in your drawer. I expect you to be eager and willing when it comes to closeness. If you truly love me, Marie, you have a lot of lost time to compensate for, I asserted. She crossed the room and knelt before me, embracing my legs tightly. I love you, Bill, more than words can express, and I'll prove it to you, she declared tearfully. I observed her pale, tear-streaked face and fearful eyes. Somewhere within me lingered traces of the love and devotion I once felt for this woman with whom I shared so much. However, they were overshadowed, rendered insignificant by my resentment towards her selfishness and hypocrisy. She deserves whatever consequences come her way, I thought. Softening my tone, I said, Listen, Marie, in 4 weeks, your significant social dinner will occur. Let's utilize this time to start anew, to potentially improve our marriage. If all goes well, the dinner will be an opportunity to celebrate the success of our renewed efforts. Agreed? She nodded, tightening her embrace. Yes, Bill. Thank you for giving me a chance. I'll be whatever you want me to be. Drawing her closer, she showered me with kisses, promising to make amends. Give me 10 minutes to freshen up, and then I'll begin making things right, she pledged, rising with a smile. As she exited the room, I reclined in my chair, amused by Marie's efforts to please me. The next 4 weeks promised to be quite amusing. I was somewhat surprised she failed to notice what I refrained from doing. I refrained from discussing the affair's details or its origins. The entire evening must have been a profound shock for her, leaving no time for reflection. But truthfully, I didn't inquire because I simply didn't care. My relationship with Marie had concluded, though she remained unaware. Upon entering the bedroom a few minutes later, I found the bed neatly made, the lights dimmed, and Marie reclining on her side in a revealing red nightgown after attending to her grooming routine. She looked stunning, as beautiful as ever, yet noticeably nervous. I noticed a bottle of lubricant on the nightstand. In a seductive yet trembling voice, she asked where I was and beckoned me to come to her, extending her arms. I quickly disrobed and embraced her. Our kisses ignited passion. Her body exuded warmth, and she wriggled with anticipation. Whether playful or not, I relished the moment, setting aside my rage and disgust toward Marie to indulge in pleasure with her. Her allure and impatience were exhilarating, particularly after years of indifference. Surrendering to her lead, I lay back as she took charge. Afterward, she extinguished the light and nestled beside me under the blanket. She gently kissed my neck and bid me good night. As I drifted into contented sleep, I anticipated receiving similar attention over the next 4 weeks. I thoroughly enjoyed the subsequent weeks as Marie devoted herself to rebuilding our marriage. The next morning, she woke me with a cheerful smile and a loving kiss, offering pleasure before breakfast. I watched as she went beyond her usual routine to prepare the children for their day. That evening, she prepared an unusual meal from a cookbook, though the kids preferred their usual fare. Marie ensured they bathed and went to bed on time so we could enjoy our evening together. Our nightly closeness was a pleasant change from before. Marie wore another nightgown, and we indulged in leisurely lovemaking. Her enthusiasm, affection, and energy remained consistent. Despite my hidden feelings, I couldn't ignore the semblance of happiness we exuded daily. Marie's loving attention persisted, both in the mornings and behind closed doors. My life seemed like a happy fantasy, albeit with a lack of trust in my wife and simmering rage beneath my facade of contentment. Harry's signed papers arrived promptly, and I quickly obtained Marie's consent for adoption, finalizing the process through a private hearing arranged by my lawyer within 10 days. Then my attorney handled the divorce proceedings. One morning at work, I had a surprise visit from Denise Reynolds, a colleague I collaborate with occasionally. At 28, she was 5 years my junior, and truly stunning. While I knew she was divorced, and her occasional flirty remarks didn't go unnoticed, I never considered her beyond being one of the women I fantasized about. In your dreams, I anticipated Denise's visit to be work-related, but it turned out otherwise. "Bill," she said, "what's different about you lately? You seem, I don't know, younger or fitter or something." "Thanks for the compliment, Denise," I replied with a smile. Then, thinking, why not? I blurted out, "Actually something entirely different, but not suitable for discussion here. Maybe we can grab lunch together today." "Sounds good," she agreed. We headed to the salad bar, then took our lunches to a park table and enjoyed the sunshine. "The change you noticed in me is probably due to my failing marriage," I explained. She looked puzzled. "And that makes you look better? Please explain." I gave her a condensed version of the story. "A couple of weeks ago, I discovered my wife was having an affair with a coworker. It's been going on for a while. I confronted him to leave her alone, and since then, she's been bending over backwards to make it up to me. Here's a secret, Denise. Marie thinks she can win me back, but I've already decided I'll be leaving her in a few weeks. I can't stay with someone who betrayed me. In the meantime, she's treating me like a king, both in and out of the bedroom. That's the change you noticed today," I concluded, and she appraised me with a look. "I'm impressed you're handling it so well," she said. "When I found out my ex was cheating, I nearly fell apart. It took me months to get back on track." "I'm sorry," I offered. "I didn't know you went through that. But I've taken control of my situation now. It'll unfold the way I want, not someone else's way. That's making me feel a lot better." Taking another chance, I added, "One nice thing about my situation is that even though I'm not officially single yet, I know I will be soon. So, I don't have to hold back from expressing my admiration for the lovely lady sitting with me in the park today," I said, smiling at her. She blushed slightly, glanced away, then back at me. "Geez, Bill, you've put me in an awkward spot. I didn't think it was so straightforward," she said. "Sorry, Denise, but you're so beautiful and fun. I've been attracted to you since we met. It's just that until now, it was off limits to talk about it. Any chance you'll join me for dinner on Saturday? I know a charming Italian place with a river view." She looked at me seriously. "Bill, I like you too, and it's always been easy with you. Can I trust you? Is your marriage truly over? Or is this just some ploy to get into my pants? Excuse my skepticism, but I've seen this scenario before. Denise, I've always been honest with you, and as you know, I've never pushed you before. I'm ending things with Marie in about 2 weeks and filing for divorce the same day. There's no going back. But I understand if you want to distance yourself. I'll just be a little disappointed." She smiled. "No, Bill. Now that you've made the offer, I'm ready to accept it before you change your mind." She gazed at me intently, and after a moment's hesitation, I leaned in, and we shared a light, tender kiss. It wasn't fiery or passionate, but it felt like a beautiful promise. As we parted, I couldn't help but smile, feeling like a joyful child. When I informed my wife about my Saturday night date, it brought out a cruel side in me. I bluntly stated that I would be going out with another woman and expected her to stay home with the kids. Marie was taken aback and on the verge of tears. "Bill," she protested, "but I've been trying so hard. Please think of something to salvage our marriage. How can you see someone else?" "It's quite simple, Marie. Not only did you see someone else, but you also engaged in a 6-year-long affair behind my back. While you've been making an effort lately, and I'm feeling better, it doesn't mean you automatically deserve my unwavering devotion. It's clear that I'll need to seek enjoyment elsewhere for quite some time before we're on equal footing." Her tears began to flow. "Will you sleep with her?" "No, but I could. And that's what you need to comprehend. If it hurts you to think about, well, that's a taste of how you made me feel." With that, I exited the room, ending the conversation. My initial outings with Denise were delightful, yet cautious. We proceeded slowly. Perhaps both of us sensed there was more than just physical attraction between us. We conversed, laughed, commiserated about colleagues, exchanged childhood stories, and simply got to know each other. It felt effortless and natural, at times reminiscent of my early days with Marie. The thought saddened me, but I pushed it aside. Following our third dinner, as I opened Denise's car door outside her apartment, she softly asked if I would like to come in. We both understood the implication, and I felt an instant surge of desire. Once inside, she melted into my embrace, and we kissed and embraced like infatuated teenagers. Pulling back slightly, she confessed to me that she really wanted this, but was quite nervous because it had been a while. She asked me to be gentle and patient. I assured her with a smile, lifting her gently, and asked her which way to her bedroom. Later, I reflected that lovemaking with Denise was incredible but noticeably different from recent encounters with Marie. She started out a bit timid, allowing me to explore and caress her body. Yet, she was so stunning that every moment with her was pure pleasure. Our first carnal encounter was tender, affectionate, and far more loving than the passionate encounters I'd had with Marie. It felt like two people caring for each other, bringing each other happiness. Afterward, Denise kissed me repeatedly and asked if I could stay the night. I gladly agreed, and we fell asleep in each other's arms. The following morning, she seemed a bit bashful again, and while we didn't make love, we bid farewell with genuine tenderness, sharing several tender kisses. With just a few days remaining until my planned wedding night with Marie, I kept my intentions hidden from Denise, but mentioned that my divorce would soon be finalized. When I returned home around 9:30 on Saturday morning, I found Marie quietly weeping at the kitchen table, clearly aware of how I'd spent the previous night. Feigning sympathy more than I genuinely felt, I embraced her tenderly. "I'm sorry, Marie. I understand how you must feel," I murmured. "Oh, Bill, this is just awful. The mere thought of you with another woman tears me apart. I've been so selfish all these years. How could I have been so oblivious to your feelings?" Looking at me with gratitude, she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance. Marie's significant night, much like mine, was rapidly approaching. To some extent, I almost lamented it. The past 4 weeks with Marie, marked by very satisfying closeness, were enjoyable, and I'll miss them. However, nothing she did even began to diminish my resentment and anger. Her utter betrayal far surpassed any attempts at reconciliation. When I examined my heart, there was only a tiny bit of love for her and a minuscule drop of sympathy for what awaited her. While collaborating on a PowerPoint presentation for her speech, I clandestinely prepared my own rendition, not precisely identical to hers, as I needed to conceal Harry's identity as the children's father. Nonetheless, the general approach mirrored hers, a sequence of photos followed by captivating videos. I rigged the laptop so that Marie's presentation would play whenever she used it. However, by inputting a specific key combination, including a passphrase, I could lock her presentation and substitute it with my unique file. In the days leading up to the event and on the evening itself, Marie anxiously asked if I had deleted the dreadful file she encountered 4 weeks ago. Each time, with a loving smile, I reassured her it was gone and demonstrated that her presentation was intact on the laptop. The last few days at home were particularly sweet. Marie began to feel more assured that she was winning me over again, and her affectionate gestures seemed less desperate, yet more serene. The pain she endured when I spent the entire night with Denise only elevated her further in our bed. Knowing that this charade was about to end, I savored every moment. When the big night arrived, we were there early, with me donning a rented tuxedo and Marie looking glamorous in a black evening dress with spaghetti straps that accentuated her neck and shoulders. We ran her PowerPoint presentation twice to ensure everything was in order. As she leaned over to place her purse under the podium, I swiftly input the key combination, signaling that everything was set and everything unfolded exactly as I anticipated. We enjoyed a pleasant dinner, engaging in friendly chatter with our companions at the table. Then, Marie was warmly introduced by the outgoing president, and she nervously approached the podium amid applause. According to my watch, her joy and anticipation lasted precisely 54 seconds. That's how long it took for the still photos of her infidelity to appear on the screen. Marie didn't freeze or spill her water, but she turned to me with horror and disbelief before futilely attempting to halt the presentation. Naturally, she failed. As the video clips played and the audience reacted with a mix of indignation and laughter, she stood there, flushed and defeated, making no attempt to respond to the vulgar remarks directed at her. Moments later, we were alone. I sat quietly, observing her from across the table. Finally, she uttered the question straight from my fantasy. "Bill, how could you do this to me? I thought you loved me." "Yes, Marie," I replied. "In these past few weeks, I loved you just as much as you loved me 6 years ago." Approaching the podium, I placed several folded papers in her hand. "I'm filing for divorce. Consider yourself served. If you remain in town, we'll have joint custody of Katie and Brian. Otherwise, I'll fight for full custody, and you know I'll win." Almost at the door, I heard her scream in anguish and fury. "But you promised you wouldn't divorce me. You said we could work things out." Turning back to face her, I responded, "Yes, Marie. So I suppose after all these years of your deceit, I lied to myself."
That day, I had been working from home, spending most of my time in the study. Since morning, the cheerful chatter of my husband, Thomas, and his daughter, Hannah, echoed through the house. It was the first time I'd heard them talk with such excitement. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly crept toward the hallway to listen. Then I heard something that stopped me cold. "It's so much more peaceful without that annoying wife around," Thomas said, his voice lighthearted. Annoying wife? Was he talking about me? My heart sank, and my mind scrambled to make sense of it, replaying his words over and over. Did he really see me like that? Before I could recover from the shock, Hannah chimed in. "We still need her for my college fees, though. We can't do without that human ATM." Human ATM? Those words stung deeper than I could have imagined. Was that all I was to them? A source of money? I had given so much to support Hannah, believing it was my role as a stepmother, hoping my care would eventually earn her trust and affection. But now, it was clear they didn't value me. They only valued what I provided. Fighting back tears, I quietly returned to my room. My hands trembled as I began packing a suitcase, taking only the essentials. When they left the house for dinner, I slipped out the door without a word. As I drove away, I felt a mix of heartbreak and resolve. Just because I was lonely didn't mean I deserved this. If all they wanted was my money, I had no reason to stay. My name is Catherine, and I'm a mid-level accountant. For 15 years, I've worked diligently in my field, building a steady, stable career. After my first marriage ended, I threw myself into my work, using it as both a distraction and a lifeline. Even during the toughest times, I stayed focused, knowing my career was my anchor. My first husband, Zach, had struggled with alcohol dependency. At first, it seemed like he just drank a little too much on occasion, but over time, it became a daily crutch. He carried unresolved pain from his past, pain I couldn't heal for him, no matter how hard I tried. Counseling or a structured recovery program could have helped, but Zach wasn't ready to face his demons. When our marriage ended, I wasn't lost. I leaned on the skills I had honed through years of hard work. Eventually, I transitioned to a better-paying position and found financial stability. Still, I sometimes wondered if I was meant to live without a family of my own, focusing solely on my career. Then, I met Thomas. Thomas worked as a pharmaceutical salesperson, often visiting my office as part of his job. He wasn't particularly assertive, but there was a gentleness about him that drew me in. My nurturing instinct kicked in, and I wanted to support him. He shared his struggles as a single father raising Hannah after his ex-wife's infidelity. His vulnerability touched me, and I believed we could build a life together. But as time went on, cracks began to show. Thomas often spoke about wanting to find a better-paying job, but seemed stuck in a cycle of switching roles without real reflection. When I asked about his strengths, his answers were vague and uninspiring. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I just feel like I keep failing." I tried to encourage him, explaining that failure was a stepping stone to growth. But his reluctance to take risks or learn from his mistakes worried me. He seemed more content dreaming about success than working for it. Still, I reassured him that my income could provide stability for us while he figured things out. Instead of feeling supported, he seemed to interpret my words as a safety net. "Thanks, Catherine," he said. "Honestly, being an employee doesn't suit me, so this is a relief. I'm not planning to quit now, but it's nice to know I don't have to worry about increasing my income." His response left me uneasy, as if he was shifting the entire financial burden onto me. But I pushed those feelings aside, telling myself he would eventually find his footing. When Thomas and I got married, I met his daughter, Hannah, for the first time. She looked me up and down with a critical gaze before bluntly asking, "So, what exactly do you bring to the table? Good job, decent salaries?" Her words took me aback for a moment. I was stunned into silence, realizing she was essentially questioning my worth. I felt a wave of embarrassment. I didn't consider myself particularly glamorous or charming, but her bluntness caught me off guard. "Hannah, that's rude," Thomas interjected. "I didn't mean anything by it," she replied casually, shrugging. I held back a retort, not wanting to create conflict during our first meeting. Instead, I tried to keep the conversation light. "So, what kind of work do you do, Catherine?" she asked with unexpected curiosity. Surprised, I decided to share a little about my job. Maybe I thought my experience might inspire her or spark ideas for her own future. "Well, I work in accounting. Do you know what accountants do?" "Yeah, like handling expense reports or reimbursements," she said nonchalantly. "That's part of it," I replied. "But there's a lot more involved." I explained my role in simple terms, handling monthly closings, preparing consolidated reports, and crafting financial strategies. I talked about managing transactions, creating budgets, and overseeing financial planning. I tried to convey that my job required both analytical and management skills. "What kind of qualifications do you need for that job?" she asked. "Well, you need accounting certifications, and if you want to advance, experience in finance or banking can be really helpful in this field." Experience often matters as much as education, I added, hoping to convey the expertise my work required. But Hannah looked completely uninterested. Thomas chimed in, his tone casual. That sounds pretty busy. So, how much do you make doing all that? For a moment, I almost answered truthfully. My salary was just shy of 6 figures, a milestone I was working toward. But when I noticed Hannah smirking and glancing at Thomas, as if they were sharing some inside joke, I decided to give a vague response. Let's just say it's a bit above average for an accountant, I said with a polite smile. Hannah rolled her eyes and made a dismissive noise. She glanced at Thomas, and the two of them exchanged a look that made me feel like an outsider. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, I continued explaining more about my work, but my words seemed to fall flat. I reminded myself that this was just the beginning.
Building a family takes time.
I thought I was determined to support both Thomas and Hannah and be part of their lives. If it came down to it, I was even willing to support Hannah's education financially. However, what I didn't realize at the time was Thomas's true intentions. Over time, it became clear that he had been planning to rely on my income from the very start. He even mentioned wanting to enroll Hannah in an expensive private university, one that was known to accept students as long as the tuition was paid up front. Once we started living together, I began noticing troubling patterns. For instance, Hannah often skipped her tutoring sessions without telling me. One day, the tutoring center even called to inform me that she hadn't shown up. Hey, Hannah, I knocked on her door. What happened with tutoring today? She answered with a bored tone. I attended remotely. Her excuse didn't sit right with me. The center had recently switched back to in-person sessions and wouldn't have called if she'd attended virtually. I started to worry about her commitment to her education. Did she really have the motivation for college, or was this just another way to take advantage of my support? Hannah, if you're struggling with any subjects, I can help you review if you'd like, I offered. Why would I need help? Hannah shot back, her tone sharp. I just thought maybe I could help, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You might feel more comfortable asking me questions. She let out a heavy sigh, clearly irritated. Look, I don't need any of that. It's kind of weird that you're trying to act all motherly. Her words stung more than I expected. My offer wasn't meant to insult her, but it was clear she had taken it the wrong way. I instantly regretted saying anything. Perhaps she was already feeling frustrated about her studies, and my well-meaning comment had only added to her stress. I'm sorry, I said quickly. You're right. You should go at your own pace. I didn't mean to overstep, but deep down, I knew the issue was serious. Missing tutoring sessions, especially in a fast-paced college prep program, would only make things harder for her in the long run. Without a strong commitment, Hannah could easily fall behind. Later that evening, I decided to bring it up with Thomas. Thomas, can we talk about Hannah's studies for a minute? Sure, what's going on? He asked. Please don't scold her, I began, trying to tread carefully, but her tutoring center has called a few times. It seems she hasn't been attending regularly. Oh, yeah, that doesn't surprise me, he said with a sigh, brushing it off as if it were no big deal. She's always hated studying. He smiled as he added, she's got her eye on a private university, one of those schools that will take her as long as we can pay the tuition. His nonchalant attitude unsettled me. Perhaps Hannah lacked motivation because she believed everything would be taken care of for her. But as her stepmother, I didn't feel it was my place to point this out. Instead, I nodded and let the conversation drop. I returned to my room, preparing for an online meeting. My new schedule allowed me to work from home twice a week, giving me more opportunities to observe Thomas and Hannah's behaviors. Little by little, my earlier worries about their intentions began to resurface. I couldn't shake the feeling that they might be expecting me to foot the bill for Hannah's entire college tuition. While I had no problem supporting her dreams, I didn't want to be taken advantage of. As the days passed, I began noticing more troubling patterns. Thomas, for example, would often sleep in on weekdays or return home early in the afternoon. One morning, I walked into the living room and was surprised to see him there. Oh, hey, I said. You're here? Yes, it's my work-from-home day. Are you off today? Actually, I took the morning off, he replied casually. I was really tired from a late night of work yesterday, but as I stood there, I caught a faint whiff of alcohol in the air. It seemed more likely he had been out drinking than working late. I let it slide, but over time, I realized these mornings were becoming a pattern. Thomas often talked about how he never seemed to fit in at work. I had always assumed he was just unlucky, but now I started to wonder if his own habits were to blame. One morning, I accidentally overslept by about 30 minutes because I hadn't been feeling well. My first meeting wasn't until 10 a.m., so I planned to take it slow and ease into the day. As I lay in bed, half asleep, I heard voices coming from downstairs. I glanced at the clock. It was already 9 a.m. Why were there voices at this hour? Thomas should have left for work, and Hannah should have been at school. Curious, I tiptoed down the stairs. "Dad, are you taking the day off again?" I heard Hannah ask. "Of course," Thomas replied, his voice relaxed. "I'm already using up my vacation days. Might as well use them before I quit." "Wait, are you really quitting?" Hannah's voice was filled with surprise. "I'll be technically between jobs," Thomas replied casually. "Not a slacker. Just, taking some time to think." I froze in place. Was he seriously planning to quit his job without telling me? "Well, I'm just a student," Hannah said, her tone casual. "So, I don't have to worry about jobs yet." They kept talking as if responsibility was an abstract concept, something they didn't have to face. And then I heard the words that shattered any illusions I had left. "Life's so much more peaceful without the annoying wife around," Thomas said, chuckling. Annoying wife. Was he really talking about me? My stomach twisted as the realization hit. My breath caught in my throat. To him, I wasn't a partner. I was an inconvenience. And then Hannah's voice chimed in, adding insult to injury. "But we can't have her gone completely. I mean, I still need her around for college expenses, right?" I froze. Did they truly think of me as nothing more than an ATM? A high school student saying that about me was beyond disrespectful. My head spun as I pieced together the truth. From the beginning, I'd been nothing more than financial support to them. Quietly, I stepped back upstairs, my heart racing. I didn't make a sound as I packed my largest suitcase with essentials. When I heard them leave for lunch, I seized the opportunity to escape. Enough was enough. Staying would only drain me emotionally and financially. I had given them countless chances, believing they would change, but they had taken my kindness for weakness. As I walked out of the house, I felt both a weight lifting and a pang of sadness. On my desk, I left the divorce papers. They would know I was serious. I rented a small but cozy apartment near my workplace. It wasn't luxurious, but it gave me the peace and privacy I desperately needed. Almost immediately, the calls began. Thomas left multiple messages, all of which I ignored. I knew he wasn't calling out of affection. He was desperate. A month passed without real contact, though his attempts only grew more frequent. Then, late one night, my phone started buzzing persistently. This time it was Hannah. I could imagine the panic setting in now that their ATM was gone, but deep down, I felt no sympathy. Finally, around midnight, Thomas called again. Sighing, I picked up. I was ready to put an end to this once and for all. "It's late, Thomas. This is highly inappropriate," I said flatly. "Catherine, finally. Where are you?" His voice sounded panicked, but I knew better than to fall for it. "That's not important. Just file the divorce papers," I said firmly. "Divorce? Why?" he asked. His faint confusion only fueled my frustration. "You know exactly why, Thomas. You said enough. I'm done being disrespected. Look, we need to talk. Amelia is planning on attending open house events, and she really wants you there." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Oh, you mean for that expensive private college? The one where tuition costs a fortune?" He hesitated. "Well, yes, but it's important for her future. She needs to be prepared." "Ethan," I interrupted, my voice firm. "It's time you face reality. Supporting Amelia is your responsibility, not mine." His silence spoke volumes. This time, I wouldn't give in to emotional blackmail. "Maybe it's time you found a stable job and stepped up," I said bluntly. Can't we just talk this out? He pleaded. I'm willing to try again. Really?
No, Ethan.
The way you and Amelia treated me, there's no going back from that. He fell silent again, seemingly out of arguments. I guess I never thought it would come to this, he finally muttered. That's because you took me for granted. Both of you did, I said, before hanging up. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of closure. I had said everything I needed to say. Over time, I stopped checking for their messages. There was no need to revisit the past. I focused on myself, enjoying the freedom and peace that came with moving on. Amelia eventually dropped out of her university plans and took a part-time job. From what I heard, she was struggling with the reality of independence, but at least she was learning. Ethan, on the other hand, drifted between jobs, occasionally reaching out for one last favor. I never responded. I had given them enough chances. It was time to live for myself. I even adopted a rescue cat, finding joy in the small, comforting moments of companionship. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my life, one step at a time. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free.
A 9-year-old boy stood up for a downtrodden woman who was facing harsh humiliation from a callous bus driver. The next day, a Mercedes arrived at his school, leaving everyone astonished. On a gloomy morning, Oliver and his dad Leo stood at the bus stop. The cool breeze brought a serene hush over the bustling metropolis as they conversed. Leo, particularly focused, imparted his final guidance to his son since he couldn't accompany him to school due to a crucial job interview. You recall what I told you, right, son? I won't be able to walk you today as I have an interview lined up. Remember to alight at the stop close to your school as we discussed, all right? It's a big city, so stay vigilant. We don't want you getting lost, Leo conveyed with a blend of concern and assurance in his tone. The 9-year-old boy, displaying a hint of independence, reassured his father with determination. I'm 9 now, Dad. I've got this, he declared, though his smile betrayed his nerves about his first solo commute. With a proud yet emotional smile, Leo tousled his son's hair. It marked a moment of maturity, a poignant goodbye to childhood. That's my boy, Leo said, his voice steady, masking his emotions. The bus rolled in with a deep rumble, its large metal body swallowing and spitting out passengers. Look, the bus is here, Leo announced, helping the youngster aboard. With a tight hug, they bid farewell, promising to reunite later. Oliver boarded, paid his fare, and greeted the driver with a shy, good morning. Watching the bus depart, Leo's mind oscillated between interview anxieties and hopes for his son's day. Seated in a corner, Oliver settled in as if it were his own universe, peering through the window. He observed the people, streets, and gray sky, lost in childish musings. The city passed by, its colors faded, accompanied by murmurs of conversation and engines. Yet, what seemed like an ordinary day was poised to become a journey of discovery and challenge. As the bus rumbled forward, Oliver couldn't fathom the surprises looming ahead. This day was bound to steer his life down an unforeseen path, one of those rare moments that shape our character and destiny. Little did he realize that his capacity for empathy would face a trial. At a bustling station, the bus halted, welcoming a stream of passengers. Amidst them, one figure stood out conspicuously. A woman, her countenance etched with anxiety, boarded the bus. Her eyes darted restlessly, scanning the surroundings as if in perpetual search. They mirrored a tangible fear and profound worry, leaving an impact on all who caught her gaze. She seemed out of place, carrying an aura of despair that enveloped her like an invisible cloak. It was her turn to go in, but she was stopped at the turnstile because she hadn't paid the fare. With hesitation, she mumbled to the driver that she didn't have the money for the ticket. Her voice was shaking, and it was clear how stunned and embarrassed she was by the situation. The driver, who was clearly not on his best day, exploded into outrage. His words were harsh and cruel. What do you mean you have no money? Then what the hell are you doing here? "Get off, girl, get off my bus." The way he raised his voice and the brutality of his words resonated throughout the vehicle, attracting curious and embarrassed looks. The woman, visibly humiliated, began to beg, trying to explain her need to get to her destination and promising with painful sincerity that she would come back to pay. "Sir, I swear I'll come back to pay you," she pleaded. But the driver was merciless, hurling accusations and unfounded judgments at her, further aggravating her humiliating situation. "As if I'm going to let trash like you ride my bus for free, and I'm going to believe that you're going to come back and pay the fare. I know your kind very well, you're all scammers," he shouted loud and clear. Tears began to flow from the poor girl's eyes, tracing paths of despair across her face. The situation escalated, and it looked like the driver was about to use physical force to remove her from the bus. He was already getting up to grab her by the arm and throw her out of the vehicle. Oliver, who until then had watched the scene with growing discomfort and indignation, could no longer contain himself. He saw that no one else seemed willing to help. Then he stood up, his small figure and determination in his eyes. With a trembling hand, he took his lunch money, the money he knew his father had worked hard to provide for him. He was looking forward to finally buying that pizza at school he wanted so much but couldn't always afford. However, without hesitation, he abandoned his needs in favor of an act of compassion. With determined steps, he approached the driver and held out his hand with the money. "There it is. Now she can get on the bus," he said in a firm voice that contrasted with his age. With a disgusted look at the man, the boy returned to his seat, feeling a mixture of anger and pride, anger at the inhuman way the driver was treating the woman and pride at having done the right thing. His little heart was pounding, not so much at the loss of his lunch money but at the intensity of what he had just done. It was a small gesture that marked not only his day but who he was becoming, a great young man. And so the bus went on, carrying with it a story of courage and humanity in the middle of a gray morning. After little Oliver's act of courage, all the passengers were plunged into a surprised and amazed silence. The driver, speechless, was still stunned by the child's audacity. People exchanged glances with each other, murmuring about the little one's attitude. The woman, now allowed to continue her journey, went to sit beside her savior. Her eyes still bore traces of tears, but there was a new sparkle in them, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I can't thank you enough, little buddy," she said, her voice still shaky. The boy, with a maturity that seemed beyond his years, took a handkerchief out of his backpack and offered it to her to dry her face. "It's okay. Nobody should be treated like that," he replied simply. The little boy then shared his own experience with the driver, recalling a day when his father, Leo, was 10 cents short and how they were scolded, humiliated by the heartless man, and forced to get off the bus and walk all the way home. The woman listened, her expression alternating between shock and sadness, but she insisted that she would somehow repay the boy for his kindness. While they talked, the world outside continued its course. The bus moved through the streets, passing buildings, stores, and more stops. People got on and off, each immersed in their own lives and stories, oblivious to the small act of kindness that took place inside that vehicle. The conversation between Oliver and the woman was brief but meaningful. He told her his name, and she gave him a gentle smile. Soon, the little one's stop arrived. He waved goodbye and got off the bus, walking with firm steps toward WS, the little school. The woman followed his journey through the window until he was out of sight, her heart still warmed by the little boy's selfless gesture. But as Oliver walked away, completely oblivious to the impact of his actions, the woman remained on the bus, staring at him. No one there could have guessed who she really was. She wasn't just a figure in trouble, a poor homeless woman, or a scammer as the driver had suggested. Her true identity was something that would leave everyone, especially the driver and Oliver, completely petrified by the events that would follow. And so, as the bus went on its way, each passenger took a piece of this story with them, not knowing how extraordinary it would become. The boy spent the day at school with an empty stomach, remembering the pizza he had so longed to buy. Despite his hunger, he didn't regret his attitude because he knew it was the right thing to do. When he returned home, he shared the story of the bus with his father. Leo listened attentively, and his eyes shone with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Your mother would be very proud of you," he said, his voice carrying a sweetness tinged with sadness. The man hugged his son tightly and then opened his wallet, giving him $10. "Here, son, for you to buy that slice of pizza tomorrow, and there will still be some money left for the other days," said his father. Oliver jumped for joy, hugging him in gratitude. Leo continued, "You see, buddy, good things are always rewarded." He tried to keep his tone light and hopeful, even though he knew that money was precious. However, they both had no idea how great the reward that was yet to come would be. The next day, Leo took Oliver to school. Unfortunately, the man had been told that he hadn't gotten the job as a delivery man because he was considered older than the other candidates, even though he was only 37. This made him sad and worried about how he would support his son, especially now that he needed a job more than ever. After the death of his wife, Leo was plunged into despair. His son was only 3 years old at the time, and the next 6 years were marked by struggles and uncertainties, with his father working odd jobs and dropping out of college, giving up his degree in automation engineering to devote himself entirely to raising Oliver. That morning, after dropping the boy off at school, Leo went to talk to the principal about his son's financial situation. Oliver had a scholarship at the private school, but it was about to end. Without a new scholarship or a stable job, the man feared he would no longer be able to keep his son in the school. However, while the little boy was settling down in the classroom and the man was dealing with financial matters, a very fancy Mercedes pulled up in front of the school. The gates opened, and a serene figure stepped out of the car. It was the woman from the bus the day before. The woman who got out of the luxury car was the embodiment of elegance and mystery. Her elegant figure and sophisticated clothing caught everyone's attention at the school, contrasting sharply with the desolate image she presented on the bus. She walked up to the reception desk with an aura that swung between authority and gentleness, attracting looks of admiration and curiosity. When she asked about Oliver and where he lived, there was an urgency in her voice, a need to connect with the boy who had shown her that unexpected kindness. The school, protective of its students, was obviously hesitant, as they didn't know what a stranger wanted with him. But the coincidence that Leo was there dealing with financial matters made the meeting easier. "You're lucky his father is here. Do you want to talk to him?" "Because we can't give you any private information about our students," said the employee, noting the importance of the request. "Yes, please call his father." "I'll be waiting," the woman asked with the politeness of a princess. A few minutes later, Leo, with an expression of concern and curiosity, was led up to her. When he saw her, his mind spun in disbelief. She was stunning, with a beauty that seemed to illuminate her surroundings. "Mr. Leo," announced the receptionist, "this woman said that your son helped her on the bus yesterday and wanted to talk to you." The man's heart beat faster, not only because of his surprise but also because he remembered Oliver's story about the poor woman on the bus. It didn't make sense because he thought it was a homeless woman, not the goddess he was seeing in front of him. She introduced herself, "Hello, Leo, my name is Daisy," and began narrating her interaction with the little boy, expressing her gratitude and admiration for him. Her words were like music to the father's ears, who listened attentively, each sentence boosting his paternal pride. "He was a real gentleman, offering me a handkerchief and paying for my ticket. Such a young boy with such a big heart," she said with emotion in her voice. The two left the reception and went to talk in the school garden, where the conversation flowed naturally in that quiet, welcoming space. As they walked, the woman shared more about her intention to help the little boy. She spoke about the importance of education and how moved she was by the situation of Leo and his son, as the receptionist had told her about them while she was waiting for him to arrive. It's hard to find such kindness and courage these days. Your son is really special, and you're an incredible father for raising him like this, she said, looking into his eyes. Then Daisy made the offer that would change their lives. I'd like to pay for your son's education. It's a small way of repaying the great kindness he has shown me. Leo was speechless. His mind struggled to process the generosity and the impact it would have on his and Oliver's future. The man tried to refuse the offer, moved by surprise. No, I can't accept it. It's too much, he said. But the woman insisted, her determination evident in every word. Please, Leo, I insist. You deserve it. Overwhelmed by emotion and gratitude, the father finally gave in. Tears began to stream down his face as he fell to his knees on the garden lawn. Thank you so much, he murmured over and over again, each word a sigh of relief and joy. In the middle of that garden, among the flowers and under the open sky, a simple act of kindness had unleashed a wave of generosity and hope that would transform their lives forever. The two of them sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. The atmosphere of the school enveloped them in a welcoming embrace. The woman began to tell her story, and each word revealed a reality that sounded more extraordinary than any fiction. Daisy Rohr was the daughter of a luxury car magnate, August Rohr, and the previous morning, just before sunrise, she had been the victim of an attempted kidnap. She described how, by a stroke of luck and determination, she managed to escape from the car in which she was captured, running desperately through the city. When she was already far away but still fearful of being found, with the crowd waking up to work, she got on the first bus she saw without any money or belongings. The anguish and fear were evident in her voice as she recounted the despair of that moment. Leo listened, each word painting a clearer picture of the woman in front of him. When Oliver helped her, she mentally recorded the location of the school, determined to find a way to repay his kindness. As she stepped out of the car, aided by a kind stranger, she dialed her dad, who promptly came to her rescue. The crooks were nabbed later thanks to the city's surveillance, and she was now out of harm's way. Leo found the tale both bewildering and awe-inspiring. Destiny had intricately linked his son's life with hers in a profound manner. While they conversed, Leo's son dashed to the playground and stumbled upon his father and Daisy. His face lit up with astonishment and happiness at the sight of her. Hey, you're the girl from the bus. After hearing the entire ordeal, the boy was dumbfounded, realizing the impact of his actions in saving her. She invited them to a diner, promising the boy his long-craved pizza. Oliver leaped with joy, and she chuckled, charmed by his innocence and happiness. After their first encounter, a real friendship blossomed between them. Daisy paid frequent visits, bringing a fresh sense of kinship and happiness to Oliver and Leo. Upon learning of the man's interrupted education, she appealed to her father, who then provided him with the chance to finish his studies and work as an engineer at the posh car company. Their lives took an unexpected turn, completely transforming due to a simple act of kindness on a bus. As time passed, Leo and Daisy fell in love, and Oliver finally found the mother figure he had longed for. Together, they formed a tight-knit family bound not just by love but also by the understanding that kindness and empathy can wield extraordinary power. Their tale demonstrated the power of a simple act of kindness to ripple through lives, touching souls and reshaping fates. Thus, thanks to the compassionate gesture of a young boy aboard a bus, the trajectory of one family's existence altered, blooming into joy and affection.